Woo! 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 What's up, everybody? Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. This is a bonus-ish episode, a companion piece to the episode released roughly at the same time on the Greek magical papyri. Except this episode, we're going to focus in on one particular theme presents itself in the Greek magical papyri. That is headlessness. I am taking the head and I am running with it. We're going to get into occult decapitations and just various head-themed occult topics. So, lucky you, audience, you're all getting some head. Metaphorically speaking, for me. Too nice. That's okay, I'm in a good mood. I just found a book I've been looking for a long time called Sacred Money from the 1920s, and it's going to help further enrich an upcoming series I have planned on the occult origins and history of money. Money. Fucking money. It's the only root of all evil that makes everything just oh so gosh darn easy. It's expensive being poor. Anywho, here we are. Let's jump ahead and get right into it. Heads will roll. There's a specific horror attached to the severed head that transcends ordinary mortality. When the skull is separated from the spine, something more than blood is lost. The seat of personality, the locus of the senses, the container of the soul, is suddenly rendered an object. Yet across 30,000 years of human history, from the plastered skulls of Neolithic Jericho to the brazen automata of medieval alchemists, from the jungles of Borneo to the papyri of Roman Egypt, the headless form has been revered not as mutilation, but as magnification, a state of being that transcends the limits of individual identity and opens a channel to powers that lie beyond the human. The most sophisticated expression of this concept emerges from the Greek magical papyri, specifically PGM V96-172, a manuscript dating to the 3rd or 4th century CE, discovered among the Anastasi collection in Thebes. Here we find the Stele of Jeu, the ritual of the Headless One, a text that would echo through the centuries to become the cornerstone of modern Western occultism. In its original context, this was an exorcism and authority-establishing rite, a technology for assuming divine cosmic power to command spirits, cure illnesses, and bind adversaries. The practitioner invokes a deity addressed as Akephaloi, the Headless One, a figure of supreme, unbegotten primordial authority. The ritual follows a precise structure. The magician first writes the invocation on a new sheet of papyrus in myrrh ink, then recites a preliminary invocation to the 4 directions, identifying himself with the Headless One through a series of barbarous names: Aoth, Abaoth, Basim, Isak, Sabaoth, Iao, and the 7 Greek vowels corresponding to the planetary spheres. The practitioner declares, quote, "I am he, the headless spirit. Having sight in the feet, I am he, the mighty one, who has the immortal fire. I am the truth, who hates the fact that unjust deeds are done in the world. I am the one who shone forth and made the light. I am the hearing which is attainable to everyone. I am the hearing of every god and goddess." Unquote. Right on. This declaration of universal identity, hearing, sight, fire, truth, establishes the magician as a microcosm of the entire created order, but specifically as one who sees through the feet rather than the head. The concept derives from Egyptian iconography, where eyes placed on the soles of feet or on the body of a headless figure represented omnipresence, a deity who perceives not through localized organs but through direct contact with the ground of being itself. The feet touch the earth, therefore the headless god sees through the earth. To understand why a god would be called headless, one must abandon modern assumptions about decapitation as defeat. In the syncretic worldview of Greco-Egyptian magic, headlessness signified transcendence. The head was the seat of localized ego, the container of the personal self with its specific features, gender, age, and limitations. A deity without a head couldn't be depicted, could not be pinned down to a single form, could not be said to have been born of any specific moment. This is precisely why the 19th century occultist S.L. MacGregor Mathers, when translating the text for the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, rendered Akephaloi not as headless, but as bornless, existing before creation, without beginning or end. The Headless One of the Papyri carries multiple layers of syncretic identity. He is Osiris, the Egyptian king, who was decapitated and dismembered by his brother Set, or Seth, before being resurrected by Isis, symbolizing death, rebirth, and sovereign authority over the underworld. In the original Egyptian myth, Seth murdered Osiris by tricking him into a coffin, then dismembered his body into 14 pieces, sometimes 13, depending on the variant, and scattered them across Egypt. Isis recovered all the pieces except the phallus, which had been eaten by fish, yikes, and reassembled Osiris, who became Lord of the Dead. But in later magical traditions, the head specifically took on special significance. The pyramid text speaks of the king's head being separated and restored, while the coffin text described the deceased's head being removed and replaced with an iron head, or the head of a god, granting immortality. He is Set himself, the chaos god of the Red Desert, sometimes depicted in late magical texts as a decapitated monster representing raw, untamed cosmic force. In the Contendings of Horus and Set, a satirical papyrus from the 20th dynasty, Set attempts to claim the throne of Osiris by proving his strength, but Horus ultimately prevails, Horus being the son of Isis and Osiris. However, in the magical papyri, Set Typhon is invoked as a power of tremendous violent force, often depicted with the head of an ass or as a headless figure, representing that which exists outside the ordered cosmos of the solar gods. He is the uncreated creator, the supreme intellect of the cosmos that needs no physical brain to think. The Chaldean oracles, contemporary with the PGM, speak of the paternal intellect that, quote, does not enclose his intellectual conceptions within the encircling walls of the head, unquote, but rather, quote, grasp the truth with the piercing points of his unsleeping eyes, unquote. The headless god sees everywhere because he is not limited by the sensory apparatus of the skull. And explicitly, the text claims that this ritual was the ritual used by Moses to deliver Israel from Egypt, binding the Headless One to Judeo-Egyptian syncretism. The attribution to Moses appears throughout the PGM. Moses the magician, not Moses the lawgiver, a figure who learned the secrets of Egyptian temple magic and used them to confound Pharaoh. This reflects the historical reality that Jewish magical practitioners in Hellenistic Egypt were syncretizing their own traditions with Egyptian and Greek methods, creating a hybrid technology of the sacred. The ritual structure relies on voces magicae, barbarous names of evocation, rhythmic strings of untranslatable words derived from corrupted Greek, Coptic, Hebrew, and Egyptian divine titles. These weren't merely nonsense syllables, although that's part of it, but were understood as the actual names of spirits, the true vibrations that could compel supernatural attention. The practitioner would sometimes speak them, sometimes sing them, sometimes hiss them, sometimes pop them with the lips, creating a physical vibration intended to resonate with specific cosmic frequencies. When Mathers placed this adapted ritual at the beginning of his 1898 edition of the Goetia, the logic was explicit. Before commanding infernal spirits, the magician must fill themselves with the absolute authority of the Supreme Being. The Bornless ritual serves as the preliminary invocation, establishing the operator as a divine authority before any lesser spirits are addressed. Later, Crowley, working in isolation in his commune/compound in Cephalou in the early 1920s, expanded the rite into Liber Samekh, transforming it from a tool for commanding external spirits into the primary ritual for achieving the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, the union between individual ego and divine higher self. Crowley's version adds elaborate Kabbalistic attributions, assigning specific god names to the cardinal directions and the 4 elements, and incorporating breath control techniques drawn from yoga. The magician assumes specific postures, standing for fire, sitting for water, lying for earth, and walking for air, while vibrating the divine names. The goal is to achieve a state of ecstasis, standing outside oneself, where the Bornless One speaks through the magician rather than the magician speaking to the Bornless One. Crowley reported that after performing the ritual daily for 6 months in 1909, he achieved a permanent transformation of consciousness, a continuous awareness of his holy guardian angel. Yet this ritual didn't emerge from nowhere. It rests upon a foundation of human practice stretching back to the dawn of agriculture. At Jericho, 9,000 years ago, inhabitants were exhuming the skulls of their ancestors, removing the flesh and meticulously remodeling the faces with plaster and bitumen, inserting cowrie shells to simulate living eyes. These weren't grave markers, but active vessels kept beneath house floors or displayed in communal niches, consulted during village decisions and agricultural crises. The skull was the permanent kernel of identity, the hard shell that endured while the flesh rot, making it the logical residence for the ancestral spirit. The technique was elaborate. After burial, perhaps 6 months to a year later, villagers would return to the grave, exhume the skull, and remove it from the skeleton. They would then clean the skull, possibly by boiling or allowing insects to remove the flesh before applying wet lime plaster over the cranium. They would model the facial features, nose, cheeks, chin, etc., using the plaster, and then insert the cowrie shells where the eyes had been. The cowrie shell, with its natural slit-like opening, resembled a human eye. And because cowries were used as currency, their inclusion may have symbolized the wealth and status of the ancestor. Some skulls were painted with ochre, and a few had hair added using asphalt or other materials. These plastered skulls were then kept in the house, beneath the floor or in special niches, suggesting they were consulted as oracles during family councils. The dead weren't gone, they were present, watching through their cowrie eyes, offering wisdom and protection. This practice suggests a sophisticated theology of ancestor worship, where the skull specifically, not the full skeleton, served as the focus of continuing consciousness. Similar practices appear at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where carved human skull fragments feature deep grooves, suggesting they were suspended from ropes attached to stone pillars, functioning as ritual offerings or protective devices. At Akephaloi, skulls were passed down through generations as heirlooms, sometimes placed in the arms of newly buried individuals. This was the original skull cult, a technology for maintaining contact with the dead that transformed the physical head into a gateway or fetish through which ancestral wisdom could be accessed. The logic of these prehistoric practices persisted into the historic period through the indigenous headhunting traditions of Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Oceania. Among the Shuar of the Amazon basin, the creation of tsansas, shrunken heads, was governed by the belief that the head contains the muisak, M-U-I-S-A-K, the avenging soul. By shrinking the head, the warrior trapped this soul stuff, preventing revenge while absorbing the victim's vital force into his own family line. The process was technically complex. After decapitating an enemy in battle, the Shuar warrior would make an incision at the back of the neck and carefully peel the skin away from the skull. They would remove the skull through the opening at the base, then sew the eyes and mouth shut with fiber cord to prevent the soul from escaping. The skin was then boiled in a special preparation of herbs and water, which caused it to contract to approximately 1/3 its original size. Hot stones and sand were inserted to maintain the shape while the skin dried, and the face was molded to preserve the features. Finally, the tsansa was rubbed with charcoal to prevent the muisak from seeing out, and it was displayed during feasts before eventually being discarded or traded. The Dayaks of Borneo practiced Nagayo, headhunting as a prerequisite for community well-being and male rites of passage. A village couldn't end mourning for a chief without taking a new head, because the spiritual essence harvested from the skull refreshed the community, boosted fertility, and energized the soil for crops. The headhunter was not a criminal, but a necessary spiritual technician, harvesting soul force to maintain cosmic balance. The skulls were treated with ceremonial respect, fed rice, wine, and betel nuts to transform the angry ghost into a benevolent household guardian, effectively manufacturing a protective ancestral oracle. In the Naga Hills of northeast India and the highlands of Luzon among the Ifugao and Kalinga, headhunting was explicitly linked to agricultural renewal and cosmic balance. The head was viewed as the primary container of Simangat, the vital life force concentrated in the skull, hair, and teeth. Taking a head was not murder, but harvesting, a transfer of energy from enemy to village. The skulls were displayed on communal skull trees or in head houses, serving as protective talismans and status symbols. The practice was governed by complex ritual law. Certain categories of people couldn't be taken, certain seasons were appropriate, and the spirits of the heads had to be appeased through sacrifice and feasting. This same logic appears in the mythology of oracular severed heads across Europe. In Norse cosmology, Odin preserved the head of Mimir, using embalming herbs and incantations after the Vanir decapitated him, keeping it by the well of wisdom beneath the world tree Yggdrasil to consult for secret counsel and news from other realms. Mimir's name derived from a word meaning the rememberer or the wise one, and his head continued to speak prophecies and give Odin secret knowledge. The god sacrificed an eye to drink from Mimir's well, but the head itself remained the ultimate source of wisdom, speaking even after death. In the Welsh Mabinogion, Bran the Blessed, a giant king, commanded his followers to cut off his head after he was mortally wounded in Ireland. For 80 years, his severed head remained fresh and conversing, an oracular protector buried finally at the White Mount in London to ward off foreign invasion. According to the myth, the head was as pleasant company in the hall as Bran had been alive, and only when the door was left open did it begin to decay, at which point it was buried facing France to serve as a protective talisman. This motif, the head that remains alive and communicative after separation from the body, appears across Indo-European mythology, suggesting a deep cultural memory of skull divination. After Orpheus was torn apart by Maenads, his severed head floated to Lesbos, washing ashore at Antissa, where it continued singing and prophesying in a sacred cave, rivaling the oracle at Delphi until Apollo himself intervened to silence it. The head was said to have been placed in a temple where it gave oracles until it was finally silenced by Apollo, who found its wisdom competing with his own oracle. The motif of the singing head suggests that music, poetry, and prophecy originate from a source beyond the physical body, continuing even when the biological apparatus is destroyed. The medieval period transformed these biological heads into mechanical ones. The legend of the brazen head, a metallic automaton capable of speech and prophecy, appears attached to several historical figures. Gerbert of Aurillac, who became Pope Sylvester II, was rumored to have cast a brass head using precise astrological alignments that could answer yes or no questions about the future. According to legend, Gerbert constructed the head through necromantic arts learned in Spain, and it told him he would die only after singing Mass in Jerusalem. Confident he would never set foot in Jerusalem, Gerbert was eventually called to a church in Rome called the Holy Cross of Jerusalem, where he died right after singing Mass, the brazen head having told the truth. Friar Roger Bacon, the 13th century Franciscan philosopher and scientist, allegedly spent 7 years constructing a brass head with the assistance of Friar Bungay, intending to ask it how to build a wall of brass around Britain to protect it against invasion. According to the Elizabethan play The Honorable History of the Life of Friar Bacon, the head spoke 3 times. Time is, time was, and time is past, before shattering when Bacon failed to hear the final utterance because he was asleep. The story reflects both the fear of artificial intelligence and the alchemical belief that metals could be animated through sympathetic magic and celestial influence. Albertus Magnus was said to have built a talking head of brass and leather that his student, future saint Thomas Aquinas, destroyed with a hammer because its chatter disturbed his studies. The head was supposedly animated by planetary spirits and could answer questions about philosophy and the future. These mechanical heads represented the alchemical attempts to create artificial intelligence, to bypass biological decay by constructing an indestructible metal skull capable of housing a spirit. They were the technological descendants of the Neolithic plastered skulls, an attempt to preserve the oracular function without the inconvenience of death. We all know what an inconvenience death can be. The same impulse appears in the accusations against the Knights Templar during their trials in 1307, when inquisitors extracted confessions under torture describing the worship of Baphomet, variously described as a bearded head, a skull, or metallic bust that glowed in the dark, brought fertility to the soil, and spoke prophecies to high-ranking knights. The name Baphomet may derive from the French corruption of Mahomet, or from the Greek words for baptism of wisdom, but the descriptions suggest a head idol similar to the Celtic cephalophores and the oracular heads of medieval legend. Whether the Templars actually worshipped such an idol, or whether the accusations were fabricated just to get that money, remains debated. But the persistence of the head cult motif in the accusations reveals the deep cultural associations between severed heads and hidden knowledge. The folklore of the headless rider extends this archetype into the realm of the undead. The Irish Dullahan, a malicious fairy of the unseelie court, rides a jet-black horse with burning eyes, carrying his severed head under one arm like a lantern to see across vast distances. His head appears as moldy cheese with a grotesque grin and darting fiery eyes, and when he stops and calls a mortal's name, that person dies instantly. Gates and walls open automatically for him, and he fears only gold. So keep that in mind. Keep a little gold around in case you got Dullahan problems. This figure derives from the ancient Celtic fertility god Crom Crach, worshipped with decapitation during Lunasad, transformed by Christian suppression into a headless demon claiming annual tolls of lives. Germanic traditions contributed to the Kopflosreiter, to the wild hunt, which will be getting its own episode very soon. Spectral headless knights, riding with Odin across the night sky, hunting the souls of travelers. Washington Irving syncretized these European myths in 1820 with the legend of Sleepy Hollow, creating the Hessian trooper whose head was carried away by an American cannonball during the Battle of White Plains, damning him to ride nightly in search of his missing skull. In every variant, the headless rider represents the ultimate rupture of identity, a figure without a face who can't be reasoned with, appearing at crossroads and thresholds where the world of the living touches the realm of the dead. While these were myths, the Blemmyae of ancient Nubia represent the intersection of historical fact and monstrous exaggeration. The Blemmyae were a real, formidable, nomadic kingdom inhabiting the eastern desert between the Nile and the Red Sea from the 3rd to 6th centuries CE, ancestors of the modern Beja people. They were renowned camel cavalry. Wow, can't believe I actually got that one. Sorry, I shouldn't even stop. I should have kept going, but camel cavalry. Okay. Who repeatedly raided Roman Egypt, forcing Emperor Diocletian to pay annual subsidies and eventually leading to their defeat by King Silca of Nobatia and suppression by Emperor Justinian. The Blemmyae were fierce warriors who practiced a form of ancestor worship and maintained independence from both Roman and Aksumite control. Their name may derive from a Beja word meaning desert or nomad, but to Greek and Roman observers, their decentralized social structure and desert habitation made them mysterious and threatening. Yet in classical geography, the Blemmyae became the Blemmyae, a headless race with faces in their chests. Herodotus described the Akephaloi of Libya, and Pliny the Elder explicitly stated that the Blemmyae had no heads, their mouths and eyes attached to their chests. Medieval bestiaries and maps like the Hereford Mappa Mundi depicted them alongside cyopods and cynocephali at the margins of the known world. Shakespeare referenced them in Othello, quote, "men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders," unquote. Sir Walter Raleigh claimed to have encountered the Ewaiponoma in South America. The transformation likely stemmed from multiple factors. Blemmyae warriors wore high-collared armor and body paint that, viewed through desert heat mirages, suggested facial features on the torso. The Greek term akephalos, meaning without a head, was used metaphorically to describe decentralized nomadic societies without kings, which literal-minded European translators interpreted as physical headlessness. One of those heights of civilization that just interpreted everything literally. And the psychological need to place monstrous races at the edges of civilization, representing the chaos beyond the ordered world, contributed to this monstrous tradition as well. The Blemmyae thus serve as a perfect symbol for the entire complex of headlessness, simultaneously real and mythological, historical and fantastical, human and monstrous. The dark underside of this obsession appears in the criminal history of unsolved murders, where heads were severed and never recovered. During the Great Depression, the Cleveland torso murders, attributed to the, quote, mad butcher of Kingsbury Run, unquote, claimed at least 12 victims between 1935 and 1938. The killer targeted disenfranchised laborers and transients, decapitating them with anatomical precision while they were alive or freshly dead. In the majority of cases, the heads were completely missing, preventing identification through dental records and ensuring the victims remained nameless. Safety director and later untouchable Eliot Ness led an exhaustive investigation, but the killer was never caught, and the identities of the missing heads remain unknown to this day. The victims were often found in the area known as Kingsbury Run, a shanty town in Cleveland's Industrial Valley. The killer displayed a knowledge of anatomy that suggested medical training, carefully removing heads and sometimes limbs with clean cuts that avoided the major joints, instead cutting through the bones themselves. This technique, known as disarticulation, that's a nice euphemism, requires significant strength and skill. Some victims showed signs of being kept alive for days before death, suggesting the killer was harvesting something beyond mere murder, the heads themselves as trophies or ritual objects, perhaps. Occurring side by side with the Jack the Ripper murders, the Thames torso murders plagued London between 1887 and 1889. The Reign of Mystery yielded a woman's torso but no skull. The Whitehall mystery deposited a headless torso in the cellar of the New Scotland Yard building while police hunted the Ripper. The Pinchin Street torso appeared headless and legless in Whitechapel. None were ever identified because their skulls were never found, leaving forensic investigators debating whether a single serial killer or medical practitioners disposing of anatomical specimens were responsible. The proximity to the Ripper murders led to speculation about connections, but the Thames torso murder remains unsolved, the missing heads preventing closure. In modern California, the Fontana Jane Doe was discovered in 1996, her dismembered torso packed in a steamer trunk, her head and extremities removed with surgical precision. Despite DNA profiling, she still remains unidentified. The St. Louis Jane Doe, found in 1983, was an African-American girl between 8 and 11 years old, bound with red nylon rope, assaulted, and decapitated post-mortem. Her head was never found, and isotope analysis suggests only that she was likely born in the southeastern United States. The Brighton trunk murders of 1934 revealed a second unidentified female torso in a train station suitcase. 5 months pregnant. Jesus. Her head and arms severed and never found. Unrelated to the primary victim, Violet K. The Bolney torso, discovered in West Sussex in 1991, featuring a male victim wearing an Italian silk shirt, his head and hands professionally removed to prevent identification. The head never located, despite isotope analysis suggesting German or Southern English origins. These cases illustrate the pragmatic use of decapitation to defeat forensic identification, but other crimes reveal the ritual harvest of heads for magical purposes. In Matamoros, Mexico, in 1989, Adolfo Constanzo led a drug trafficking cult that murdered at least 15 people, including American college student Mark Kilroy. No one gave a shit until the white boy was murdered. Constanzo decapitated his victims to bind their spirits to a central nganga, a ritual cauldron containing human brains, blood, and severed skulls, believing the trapped Mfumbe would grant magical invulnerability from law enforcement. The nganga was constructed according to Palo Mayombe tradition, with specific ingredients including human remains, animal blood, and earth from cemeteries, crossroads, and prisons. Between 1979 and 1980, the Fall River cult in Massachusetts, led by Carl Drew, murdered Karen Marsden in a wooded ritual circle, decapitating her and passing her severed head among participants to enforce silence through spiritual terror, reportedly retaining the skull as a sacred relic. Drew claimed to be a satanic high priest, and the murder was allegedly part of a ritual to maintain his power over the cult members through fear and magical intimidation. Along the U.S.-Mexico border in the 2010s, narco-cultura practitioners of extremist Santa Muerte veneration carried out targeted decapitations specifically to offer fresh severed heads at shrines to La Santísima Muerte, securing divine intervention and spiritual dominance over rival syndicates. The heads were placed on altars as offerings to the skeletal saints, believed to grant protection and power to those who made such extreme sacrifices. In Andhra Pradesh, India, in 2019, a practitioner of dark tantric rites named Chintakani Venkateswarlu decapitated a young male victim during a specific lunar phase, placing his head on his home altar before a yantra, anointing it with vermilion and turmeric, believing that consuming blood from the severed head would grant hidden treasure and supernatural siddhis. The ritual was intended to invoke a specific deity through the offering of the most vital part of a human being, the head, as the seat of consciousness and power. In Victoria, Australia, in 2002, the murder of antique dealer David Orr featured occult symbols, inverted crosses, and geometric patterns drawn in blood on the walls. The killer decapitated Orr and removed his head and hands, not to prevent identification, but as necessary ritual components for ongoing magical workings. The scene suggested a deliberate magical operation rather than a simple homicide. On February 8, 1981, the headless body of Leroy Carter Jr., a 33-year-old homeless military veteran, was discovered zipped inside his sleeping bag near Alvord Lake in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Carter had been decapitated with surgical precision, and his head, brain, and ear were completely missing from the scene. San Francisco Police Department investigators consulted Sandy Gallant, an SFPD officer specializing in occult and ritualistic crime. Gallant identified the decapitation as a ritual working tied to Pala Mayombe, a dark syncretic tradition. She predicted that the head was harvested to construct an nganga, a central cauldron powered by a human skull, or kiyumba, and that, according to ritual practices, the killer would return the head to the crime scene exactly 42 days later after completing the requisite rites. Local law enforcement disregarded Gallant's warning, laughing at her even, and failed to maintain surveillance on the site. Exactly 42 days after the murder, on March 22, 1981, Carter's severed head was found deposited back at the exact same location where his body had been discovered. No arrests were ever made, and the case remains one of California's most chilling unsolved occult homicides, a modern urban manifestation of the head harvesting tradition used to construct protective or destructive spiritual engines. Just a few more missing heads include cases such as Robert Hollis, Inglewood, California, 2015. The 75-year-old blind musician known locally as Mr. Bojangles was found decapitated inside his apartment. Nothing of value was stolen from the residence, and the killer took Hollis's head when exiting the scene. It has never been located. Russell Dermond, Lake Oconee, Georgia, 2014. The 88-year-old former executive was found decapitated in the garage of his gated waterfront home, while his wife, Shirley, was abducted and later found drowned in a nearby lake. Investigators believe Russell was decapitated to prevent forensic identification or conceal a specific cause of death, but his head has never been found. The Kharkiv beheadings in Kharkiv, Ukraine, 2012. Judge Volodymyr Strobinsky, along with his wife, son, and son's partner, were killed in their home. All 4 victims were decapitated with a sharp blade while still alive or immediately post-mortem, and the killer or killers carried all 4 heads away from the scene in bags. None of the heads have ever been recovered. Julia Baez, New York City, year 2000. The 36-year-old woman's dismembered torso was discovered wrapped in trash bags in a vacant lot in the Bronx. While her limbs were eventually located in separate locations, her head was never found, leaving the case cold and preventing a definitive determination of her exact cause of death. The Haw Bridge torso, Gloucestershire, England, 1938. Fishermen in the River Severn pulled up a torso and limbs of an unidentified middle-aged male. The cuts showed anatomical precision, but the head was never recovered, leaving the victim permanently unidentified and earning the case a place among Britain's most famous pre-war mysteries. The Papyri beheading, or Adam of the Thames, London, UK, 2001. The torso of a young African boy, aged 4 to 7, was found floating in the River Thames. His limbs and head had been removed with professional precision, and all blood had been drained from his body. Toxicology tests revealed traces of West African ritual potion ingredients, such as Alstonia and Datura, along with bone isotope analysis pointing to the Niger Delta. Metropolitan Police consulted ritual crime experts who concluded that Adam, a pseudonym, was sacrificed in a muti or obeah human sacrifice ritual designed to harvest vital organs, specifically the head, to manufacture powerful talismans for health or fortune. The head has never been recovered. Paichi Onyemaichi, Kilkenny, Ireland, 2004. The 25-year-old Malawian woman, daughter of Malawi's Chief Justice, was found severely beaten and decapitated, wrapped in black plastic bags under a bridge in Pilltown. Her head was cleanly removed and never recovered. Local authorities, the Garda, investigated her husband's ties to regional occult groups, and the case attracted widespread speculation regarding quote-unquote voodoo or juju ritual killings. Her husband vanished shortly after her death and remains a missing person. The Blissfield Township decapitation, Lenawi County, Michigan, 1997. A farmer discovered the naked body of an unidentified male in a cornfield. The victim's head and hands had been severed with a saw. No clothing or personal effects were nearby, and the missing extremities prevented immediate identification. Due to the precise removal of the heads and hands, classic components in Afro-Caribbean traditions like Palo Mayombe, where hands, or matos, and the head, or kiyumba, are harvested to construct working cauldrons. Investigators suspect a trophy or ritual harvest, though the case remained cold for decades. The Banbury/Baphomet cult murder, Toledo, Ohio, 1981. The dismembered body of Father John Ryan, a Catholic priest, was found in a park. His head and hands had been cleanly severed and were missing from the scene. Written in blood near the body were inverted pentagrams and references to Baphomet. The missing head and hands were investigated as trophy components harvested by a local left-hand path or anti-Christian occult sect attempting to desecrate a priest's body for high ritual workings. The head was never recovered. I will say, however, that in other cases where priests are violently murdered, it's probably worth looking into the past of that priest. That's all I'll say on that. The St. Louis Baby Jane Doe case, St. Louis, Missouri, 1983. The body of an unidentified black girl, aged 8 to 11, was found in the basement of an abandoned apartment building, bound with red nylon rope. She had been assaulted and decapitated post-mortem. Her hands were bound and her head was missing. It's never been located. While police investigated various leads, occult researchers and cold case experts pointed out the symbolic use of the red cord and post-mortem harvest, suggesting the child's head was taken as an energetic trophy for localized necromantic workings. The Black Magic Tantric Decapitations, Assam, West Bengal, India. Beyond standard criminal cases, regional police in Assam repeatedly investigate unsolved decapitations near the Kamakhya Temple, a prominent site for tantric practice. In a notable case from 2019, the headless body of a woman named Shanti Shah was found near the temple steps, completely drained of blood, with her head missing. While 5 men were eventually arrested years later for performing a human sacrifice, or Narabali, to commemorate a dead guru's death anniversary, the actual head was reportedly taken to be used as a kapala, or ritual skull vessel, in private left-hand tantric or agori sakta rites, and was never recovered by police. The Economy, Pennsylvania inverse case, in Economy, PA, 2014. In a strange inversion of the missing head phenomena, a teenager found a severed, embalmed head of an elderly woman placed in the woods. Her eyes had been removed and replaced with red rubber balls. Extensive forensic testing proved the head had been professionally embalmed using modern chemicals and severed with precision. But no matching torso was ever found anywhere in the region. Police investigated local grave robberies and satanic ritual abuse angles, but neither the woman's identity nor the rest of her body has ever been discovered. Now, I may have mentioned this before about, ritual murders. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But, Is there a possibility that these ancient occult practices like this, even if the perpetrator of a violent crime like this doesn't specifically have ritual on their mind, like they're not specifically harvesting a human head or what have you to be used in an occult ritual, could the ancient, thousands of years old ideas have somehow exercised themselves out of the collective consciousness, maybe? Possibly guiding their hand during these violent acts to sort of inadvertently, unconsciously drive the quote-unquote ritual aspects of their crimes. Just something to think about. These criminal manifestations echo the codified magical operations found in historical grimoires. The Picatrix, the medieval Arabic manual of astral magic translated into Latin in the 13th century, describes in Book 3 a complex divination rite requiring the decapitation of a child born under specific astrological alignments, specifically when Mercury is in a favorable position and the moon is waxing. The head is to be salted and embalmed, placed upon a gold plate with planetary talismans inscribed with specific characters, and invoked with Saturnian or Mercurial spirits to reveal future events and hidden treasures. The ritual explicitly states that the head will speak in a clear voice, answering questions put to it until the planetary hour passes and the spirit departs. John Aubrey, the 17th century antiquarian, recorded an English folk necromancy ritual requiring the severed head of an executed murderer or suicide, buried with 7 black broad beans and watered with brandy for 7 days. The sprouted beans, when placed in the mouth, were said to grant invisibility or the power to see spirits. This represents the survival of prehistoric skull cult practices into early modern England, where the head remained a source of magical power that could be cultivated like a plant. In the Afro-Cuban tradition of Palo Mayombe, the Ngango or Prenda, the central altar vessel, required human remains, most crucially the Kiumba, the human skull, which serves as the engine housing the Mfumbe spirit. The practitioner forms a pact with the spirit inhabiting the skull, commanding it to execute protection, cursing, or healing. The Nganga is constructed from an iron cauldron filled with earth from specific locations, animal remains, herbs, and the Kiumba, which is awakened through ritual to become an active spiritual entity working on behalf of the Polero. The Grimorium Verum and the Munich Manual of Demonic Magic prescribe placing consecrated parchment inscribed with demonic seals into the mouth of a severed skull while burning sulfur and storax beneath the jaw, using the head as a temporary biological loudspeaker for summoned demons or dead souls. The skull serves as a kind of spiritual telephone, the bone structure amplifying the voices of the dead. In the left-hand path tantric traditions of India, the Kapalika and Agori ascetics utilize the Kapala, a skull cup crafted from the top of a human severed head, for ritual offerings to wrathful deities like Bhairava and Kali. The Agori perform Shava Sadhana, meditation beside a corpse, using a fresh human head as an altar center, transcending earthly dualities to achieve moksha and siddhis. They believe that by confronting the most terrifying aspects of existence, death, decay, and the severed head, one can transcend the fear that binds the soul to the cycle of rebirth. The persistence of these practices into the modern era suggests something deeper than mere superstition. The head represents the most concentrated form of human identity. The face that recognizes others, the brain that houses memory, the eyes that perceive the world, and so on. When removed from the body, it becomes an object that retains the appearance of the person but lacks the animating principle, creating an uncanny valley that simultaneously attracts and repels. The skull, stripped of flesh, becomes a universal symbol, no longer a specific person, but death itself, the great leveler who takes all heads equally. From the plastered ancestor skulls of Jericho to the brazen automata of Richard Bacon, from the Nganga cauldrons of Palo Mayombe to the unsolved torso murders of Cleveland, the severed head persists as the ultimate magical locus, a physical antenna bridging the living and the dead, a containment vessel for consciousness, an energy source charged by the trauma of decapitation. The headless one of the Greek magical papyri, the bornless spirit with sight in its feet, represents the philosophical apex of this tradition. The recognition that true power lies not in the ego-bound consciousness of the individual's skull, but in the dissolution of the self, the removal of the head that contains the limited personality, opening the way for the uncreated, immortal fire to speak through this empty vessel. Whether through prehistoric ritual, indigenous headhunting, medieval alchemy, or modern criminal occultism, humanity has never stopped searching for what lies beyond the severed crown. That's going to do it for this little long walk off a short tangent. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Got a lot of stuff coming down the pike. I'm going to try not to hit you guys with too much content all at once, but there's a lot of it. There's just a lot of it. So, here it comes. Get ready. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht. I love you fucking guys. Seriously. You are the best people in the world. Listen to this show. I love you. Love yourselves. Love each other. Take care of each other, because we are all we fucking got. And we'll see you next time as we traverse the depths of deep weirdness, the peaks of high strangeness, and the outer limits of the Twilight Zone. Peace. Heads up!
Wham! His kappa is detated from his head.